over the room.
The silence fell over the room. So, welcome. So, this is the fourth and final WisPolitics DC event for 2024. Thank you all for being here. I think this is on. Hopefully. So we specially ordered this weather just for you all to make it feel like we're actually in Wisconsin. You're welcome. So, in case you're still a little sleepy from the turkey, I am not Jeff Mayers of WisPolitics. These guys are laughing. Nothing gets by you, right? My name is Wendy Riemann. I'm a professor at George Washington University. I'm also a proud Wisconsinite and a Wisconsin grad. So Jeff had a conflict today, so he asked me to fill in his shoes. They're like size 11, I'm 7.5, so we'll just roll with it. I first need to thank our generous sponsors who made today possible: Michael Best and Michael Best Strategies, WPS Health Solutions, Excel Energy, Marquette University, and the Les Aspin Center for Government. I know there's some Marquette students here, right? Yay. There we go. The University of Wisconsin-Madison. I believe there's some Wisconsin students here. Oh, a little louder. Okay. We got the rivalry continues. And the Wisconsin Alumni Association is an event partner. So last time we met, we were actually at the beautiful Les Aspin Center. If you remember, we were about 50 days out from the election. Charles Franklin, Craig Gilbert, Professor Mason all talked about the election. Feels like forever ago, right? Like legit forever ago. Since then, America reelected Donald Trump as president, and Wisconsinites reelected Tammy Baldwin to the United States Senate. Yay. So Wisconsin is now one of 3 states that will send a split party delegation, 1 Democrat, 1 Republican, to the Senate in January. Anyone know the other 2? Put my professor hat on. Maine is 1, nicely done. Pennsylvania, there we go. I love it. Look at this crowd, A+. But 3 is the literally the lowest number since 1914 when we started electing senators directly. Anyone know the number of high? I'm a professor, I can wait you out. 27. 27 were split back in 1980. So, I know, right? Times have changed. So the senator's going to fill us in on that today. We're excited to welcome Senator Tammy Baldwin as our special guest. So we'll talk about the past campaign, the present lame duck session, and the future of the 119th Congress and Donald Trump's second term. So I don't really think she needs an introduction in this room, so I'll kind of speed along and say she's a native Wisconsinite, born in Madison, Wisconsin graduate. She served 7 terms in the House before heading over to the Senate. She's on APROPS, the Help Committee, and the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. And of course, most importantly, she backs the PAC. So please help me welcome Senator Tammy Baldwin.
Thank you.
Yeah, you should be good. And we're mic'd here. There we go.
Okay.
So
we don't need them, or we do?
Well, you can.
All right.
Louder for here. So, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Election day wasn't even a month ago. Feels like forever ago. Have you recovered from the campaign yet?
Not completely. and part of that is because following a campaign, you do a lot of rehashing and postmortems and discussions. So, like, I started my day earlier with a discussion of what went right, what went wrong, you know, with folks who are veterans of the various campaigns. And yeah, so part of it is still refreshed every day when we're thinking about what's just happened. But
do you have a favorite part of campaigning?
Traveling around the state. I took many tours around the state during the course of the campaign. But one of the favorites, we rented an RV. And on that particular trip, I had a special guest with me every day, which was also kind of fun to have a pal doing the campaign activities and the stops. But yeah, it's such a beautiful state, and you know, what draws us together is you know, there's more commonalities than there are differences. But I do have to say, you know, going you know, in the North Woods is a very different feel sometimes than being in Madison or in the southeast part of the state.
Do you have a least favorite part of campaigning besides not getting any sleep?
I don't like the raising of money.
Yeah.
It's I mean, first of all, it's a reminder every day that we've got to figure out a new campaign finance system somehow, which is hard to do in the wake of the Citizens United decision. Yeah, I'd rather be working on policy than raising money.
Fair enough, right? Why do you think you won Wisconsin while Kamala Harris lost Wisconsin? Wisconsin had like that mix of the Baldwin-Trump voters. Back in the day, it was the Baldwin-Walker voters. Like, we've got a special state.
Yes, well, I think part of the explanation is just putting in the time and what I was just describing, showing up everywhere, going and touring the state, traveling extensively, listening to people. And it's not that Kamala Harris did not do that in her campaign. She paid a lot of attention to Wisconsin, but she had 107 days. And I've been able to build those relationships over many, many years. And I think that's probably the profound difference.
Yeah, she had 107 days, but then, you know, I've talked with so many people, Republicans, Democrats, men, women, older, younger, and they say, like, we don't want to put a woman on the top of the Democratic ticket for a while. Like, what will it take for a woman to become president?
So I really don't think that this was about her being a woman. I think this was about a change election where the party in power has heavy headwinds, and people were voting their pocketbooks, their wallets. And I think, you know, one of the differences, you know, and again, in my race, your previous question was that I was sort of, you know, I had relationships around the state, and people knew that I had delivered, that I listen, show up, and deliver, and so I don't think it was about rejecting there being a woman at the top. I think it was about voters feeling the pinch when they went grocery shopping and finding childcare and housing costs, and wanting a change.
Mm-hmm. So would you advocate for her to run again in 4 years?
I'm not. I'm not looking out that far in terms of. I know that we have a very excited a bunch of individuals who I've had a chance to meet with over many years. Some of whom I serve with in the Senate. Some of whom, you know, are governors and other leaders who are looking at possibly running in 2028.
So are there lessons, as we look to 2026 and the Senate being such a close battle, are there lessons the DNC chair can take from your race for 2026?
Oh, there's certainly a lot of things that people can learn from the race that we ran. But I also think that there's deeper lessons that, and as I said when I started out, I just came from, the campaign doesn't feel that far behind me because we continue to rehash it and think, but I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from races across the country, including the presidential race, that will help inform what the DNC does next, but what all of us do next.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just reading the news, you see unions everywhere. Marquette has a new union, GW has a new union, Act 10 overturned. Like, there's not a page that you flip where you're not seeing some sort of union story. President Biden was the first president to march on the picket line in support of union workers. Yet then we had many union members supporting Donald Trump. The Teamsters president spoke at the Republican National Convention. I know that's an issue. Unions are an issue that you're passionate about. Like, how do you explain what's happening with unions today?
Well, it's a very complicated set of issues. But you know, you mentioned the court striking down Act 10. That's probably everybody in this room knows about Act 10 and when it was brought forward, et cetera, and the idea that that public sector workers could not collectively bargain, and there has been, I think, a lot more organizing almost in response to that. I think I think I'll speak from my own experience rather than do sort of be a pundit about what's happening with the unions, but I remember when there was a pension crisis that happened with the Teamsters pension. They had their pension through what was called Central States Pension. And they received letters that said that their pensions were going to be cut from anywhere between 50% and 70%. And imagine being retired, maybe being in your 70s. And the idea of like going back to work when you hear this news is not really in the cards. And it's just like the rug being pulled out from underneath you. And I started meeting with these retired Teamsters as they began organizing themselves to speak out about, we've got to do something about this. This is fundamentally unfair. These are earned benefits. And we worked together for years. But I remember before the last election in 2018, we had not yet solved the issue. We were working on potential policy solutions to this. And I remember being in one of the union halls with a couple hundred retirees. And the leader of the organization said, and it was mostly guys, so guys, we've got to vote our wallets this election. What other factors you think about when you vote, we've got to vote our wallets. This is existential for us. And I really felt like everyone did do that. And these folks now, then we were able to address the issue and resolve the issue in the American Rescue Plan. And folks that I'm quite convinced were Trump Tammy voters came forward, rank and file retirees from and cut an ad for me and said, she picked this fight with us and we won. And I think, that's, again, the result of that hard work, showing up, listening, and delivering results.
Mm-hmm. When you talk about the vote your wallets, because I think that was a message we sort of heard more from the Trump side, do you think Kamala Harris's messages maybe just weren't reaching enough people? Like she wasn't focusing on those pocketbook issues enough? Like she should have changed some of that messaging?
So I certainly think that candidates need to confront the challenges that voters are stressed about. And there was no question that making ends meet, the pocketbook issues, the kitchen table issues were top of mind. What I would say, and this is kind of, it's going to sound like a little tangent from your question, but I think we have to more deeply understand where people get their news and their information. And so it's not enough simply to have the messenger saying something and there being a little bit of an echo chamber. There's some places where people get their information where Democrats aren't getting through at all, if that makes sense.
So how do you change that with the news media? Like we saw this so much when the Washington Post didn't make an endorsement, right, for a candidate 2 weeks before the election. And then you saw the Atlantic making it one of a rare magazine endorsement in their entire history. Is there something you think the media should be doing more so people yield to that mainstream press? Is the mainstream press part of the past? Like, what do we need to do to get people reading, to understand what's fake news and what's not?
Yeah. Boy, it's going to be a long-term and difficult process. But one of the things I think we should also be aware of is media ownership. What happens when a billionaire buys a newspaper or a newspaper chain? Does that impact what they're reporting versus just what you hear at the editorial desk? Does a billionaire owning a newspaper affect whether they endorse a candidate? I mean, my understanding was that the endorsement was already written when that decision was made, or at least a good draft was already put together. And so I think that's part of it, is understanding, who owns it, and tracking that closely. But also, the consumption. We were just talking earlier today about, if you get most of your news through a social medium or through podcasts, through influencers, is word getting out? Am I kind of answering your question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it makes me think of another one now.
And then, and do we teach young people in particular to reverse engineer and figure out, all right, just because it used to be like, if it was in print, it must be true. And now if it's like, if my cousin sent it to me, it must be true, right? I mean, do we figure out how to pull that thread until we figure out where the actual source was? Mm-hmm. And there was, somebody was tracing for us this morning how it came to be that our president-elect was talking about the pets in Ohio. And you could reverse engineer that if you and find out where the original source was, and it was, source with quotation marks. Mm-hmm. But are we doing that, and do we have to be better at doing that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm. So as you were mentioning the billionaires and the money, it got me thinking about looking at some of the exit polling from this cycle, and I kind of feel like, are the parties having an identity crisis? Is this the new way? Because you had the people making less money with less education voting for Trump, and then you had people making more than $100,000 and more educated and having their degrees voting for Kamala Harris, which is almost a little bit of a flip. Like, are the political parties having an identity crisis? Is this the way of the future? Is this just transition? What's going on?
Well, I think it relates to the previous question about where people are getting information to inform the decisions. And so, if you are getting information, I should put that in quotes too, getting your facts in quotes, from sources with a bias, with a mission, that's going to be problematic. We were talking about the brand, and the brand is usually a combination of let's say the Democratic brand. It's a combination of what Democrats are saying about themselves to brand themselves, but it's also about what the opposition party is saying to about that brand. And it's not just one of those things.
Mm-hmm. Just wrapping up the union thing a little bit and moving to kind of present day, Donald Trump recently nominated one of the most pro-union Republicans to serve in Congress to be his labor secretary. So she supported the PRO Act, which was one of the union bills that would strengthen workers' rights to organize and limit retaliation from employees. Are you watching anything with this nomination? And Donald Trump's he continues to sort of flirt with the unions a little bit. Like, what are you watching with that?
Yeah, I'll be very interested when that confirmation comes before the Senate, because I presume that we won't have recess appointments, and we will actually go through the business of conducting confirmation hearings. But she'll come before the Help Committee. And that's where the PRO Act resides when it's introduced. And we actually held, in this last session, a hearing on the PRO Act for the first time. It was a very colorful hearing. As you may recall, there was a little standoff between one of our members and one of the union leaders who was there. But in any event, they threatened to go up, take it out to have a fight of some sort. It was quite something. I was standing really close. I was worried something would erupt. But I'm curious to see whether she will continue to support the PRO Act in this role, because it's obviously something that is opposed pretty vociferously by most Republicans. So whether she stands by that position she's taken. But for me, in these confirmation hearings, it's all about how will this impact Wisconsin workers. And that's the lens through which I look at all the nominees, is how is this person and the policies they represent, how is that going to impact our state?
Do you think she'll be the most problematic Trump nominee, or is someone else do you see being more problematic to get confirmed?
Look, we're already seeing some nominations being withdrawn and replaced. And so there are certainly some that are very troubling to me right now. And whether they will be Trump's final nominee, I mean, he's not president yet. I'm sure we'll start some of the confirmation hearings prior to his inauguration. But you know, that we won't start them before January, and I'm not sure the cast we have right now will be the cast we have in January.
Are you thinking perhaps Hegseth for SecDef may not get through?
I am thinking that is quite possible, and I hear I hear my Republican colleagues saying that, not openly on the record, but certainly quietly I hear them talking about that.
Yeah. So the rumor mill talks about potentially Senator Joni Ernst being like a replacement for SecDef. Do you think your colleagues would get behind that?
My guess is that they would be excited about that nomination.
Cool. What do you think the Democrats' role in vetting all of these nominees will be?
I think that we need to insist upon thorough vetting, and it sounds like there's already been discussion of we're going to do it a new way. We're not going to do the traditional FBI background checks, et cetera. But I think we should insist on as much information as we can possibly get without undue delays. In past, we have tried to make sure that new president and incoming president starts with at least a few important, crucial members of their cabinet, so they, while we settle the rest. And so I'm hopeful that that can be done this time. Hopefully, that wasn't always the case with regard to our current president, because Republicans slow-walked a few of these. But I think it's really vital that that we have some of those folks in place.
Mm-hmm. So we also from Wisconsin have former Congressman Sean Duffy, who was nominated for Secretary of Transportation.
Yes.
I know back in the day, you worked with him and Governor Walker, Governor Dayton, and the entire Wisconsin and Minnesota delegation on getting that St. Croix Bridge passed, which I read in the journals, Wall Street Journal, was one of the reasons he was nominated for transportation. Do you have a reaction to the former Congressman Duffy being nominated?
Well, I'm excited to have the potential of somebody from Wisconsin in that role. I said I look at these confirmations through the lens of how will they help our state. And boy, do we have a lot of big infrastructure projects sort of underway. And I remember the St. Croix Bridge very well. Usually it doesn't take an act of Congress to build a bridge. But in this particular case, it did. And it took an act of Congress because the St. Croix River, which is sort of our northwest border, is labeled a wild and scenic river. And you can't build infrastructure over it without an act of Congress. And so I remember working across the party aisle to make sure that we did give the green light to that bridge. And it's a vital piece of infrastructure connecting the two states. And the old bridge that preceded it was very decrepit and very dangerous, frankly. And it was also a drawbridge, so you had to wait if there were major boats traveling up and down the river to get across. And I actually have a story about this one. So I spent Thanksgiving with my uncle and his family in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I was spending Thanksgiving the year before that bridge was. Before we passed the law allowing for the bridge. And the fellow sitting to my right was a friend of my uncle's who worked or lived in Wisconsin but worked right across the river in Minnesota. And I told him that the next day I was going to hear from the group that was pushing for the bridge to be constructed. And it was very clear that he was not going to pass the potatoes or the turkey unless I agreed that I would be, voting to build this new bridge. And I was like, yeah, you got it. You got me. You got my vote.
Pass the potatoes now, please.
Please pass the potatoes, right? But we have a lot of major projects. We have the Blotnick Bridge that connects Superior to Duluth. $1 billion has been allocated from the bipartisan infrastructure bill to build a new bridge there. Again, the existing one is decrepit, is major need of reconstruction. And having somebody from Wisconsin who is going to be a good steward of those dollars would be really, I think, very helpful.
Excellent. I know yesterday you were advocating to push through the Farm Bill.
Yes.
How do you think that fight will get what do you see, a short-term extension and then push it into next year?
I know that Wisconsin farmers need the certainty of a 5-year Farm Bill. And it has been frustrating to watch. This is, in some ways, I think the battles are more between the two houses than they are between the two parties, although there's certainly no lack of disagreement there. But I really do think that the Senate is taking a much more comprehensive approach, understanding the interrelation of the provisions within the major titles within the Farm Bill. And I just think we need to be saying loudly and clearly, we need to get this job done. The fact that the chairwoman, Senator Stabenow, is retiring, I wish we could figure out a way in this last month of the lame duck to get it done. But her blueprint and her bill is the direction I think that we need to go in. And boy, do Wisconsin farmers need that.
How do you think the fight will be different, though, in another month or two? Like, what's going to change from right now to the next Congress?
Well, I don't think it will be that different, and that's why we should get it done now rather than kick it down the line. I do think that we will continue to have a challenge between the House version and what they'll be inclined to do, requiring only a simple majority vote to get it done, and the Senate, where we need 60 votes to get things done. We will always take a more bipartisan and, in this case, more comprehensive approach to it in the Senate because of that 60-vote requirement. And therefore, we just need to keep on telling the House, look, it's never going to see the light of day here in the Senate unless you guys work together and produce something that can pass on a bipartisan basis. And we say that around appropriations every year also. We've taken, in the Senate, we've gotten 11 out of the 12 appropriations bills out of committee on huge bipartisan margins. Just a couple detracting votes with each bill. And in the House, they just can't do that.
So do you have other predictions for the lame duck agenda?
Well, I think we will pass the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. That is something that has always passed in every calendar year for about the last 60 years. And I know we're pushing it very late, but I do think we'll figure out a way to get that done. We will, I think, do a short-term continuing resolution to fund the government, but I also think we will have a good chance of attaching to that the disaster supplemental that helps the states respond to the natural disasters, especially the 2 hurricanes we recently had. But also, we still haven't addressed the fires in Maui or the flooding that we had in Vermont. So those are still outstanding in terms of funding that needs to happen.
And I think you were just recently re-elected as the Senate Democratic Conference Secretary. How do you see the caucus changing as we go into next term?
Yeah. Well, we will be shaped in part by, we have some members retiring and some members who were not reelected also. But we have an infusion of some really great new senators or senators-elect right now that I'm really enjoying getting to know. Our leadership team is changing slightly, but I really think that the changes that you will see relate more to this lessons learned from the last election. We'll also be going from, let's call it, if you want to use a sports metaphor, going from being on offense to being on defense. And that involves also picking battles. We can't fight every battle, so picking battles, picking them carefully in a way that defines who we are and that we're fighting for the people who sent us to fight for them.
What do you think will be the number one battle? Like, what's the most pressing issue in America and Congress?
Well, I think this is, I think the major legislative effort, I assume this will be on budget reconciliation, will be a major tax package. And I think in tackling that battle, and I talked about this in my campaign, it is reminding people that they're going to spend somewhere around between $4 and $10 trillion to provide new tax breaks to the very wealthy and big corporations. And this is at the same time that people are saying, I can't afford to make ends meet, right? And so we need to remind people that they're going to be in a position of looking at major cuts. We have Elon Musk talking about, $2 trillion, major cuts to things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, to pay for this tax break. I mean, I think that's the major battle. It addresses the issue that people are concerned about the most, which is making ends meet, the cost of things, in a way that harms them even more.
So that's in Congress. Would you say that's nationwide too for Americans, or is there something else that's most pressing?
No, I think that'll be the big thing. I was hearing, and this is just scuttlebutt around the Capitol, but that at first there was an idea that they might lead with that, and then. But now I'm hearing, and these are just rumors, but that they might want to wait closer to the end of the year, next year, when some of the 2017 Trump tax provisions expire. I don't know which they'll end up doing, but I think that will be something that takes up a lot of oxygen.
Well, lots of oxygen, and I've used up a lot of oxygen. So, have questions for the senator? Yeah, we'll start here and then go to you.
I know throughout your career you've connected with a lot of people who disagree with some of your policies, and what is your best advice for connecting with people who disagree with you politically?
Best advice for people disagreeing with you politically?
Oh my goodness. Well, first of all, I think when I run for office, I think it's really important for me to articulate the things that, my core values and what I believe in, and the things that I'm unlikely to change on just based on, lobbying or, that sort of, not lobbying, but, conversations. So for example, I am pro-choice. And I think it's really important that I say, you're not going to be able to convince me otherwise, right? And so if that is your number one and only issue, and you're in disagreement, vote for the other person, right? Put it out there. But there's so many other things where my listening informs what it is that I'm going to do, and that I'm, that I'll learn from the exchange. So let's see, when I disagree, I think sometimes it's just to talk through the issue. I'm trying to think of a good one. Let's see. Dairy pride. So the Food and Drug Administration is supposed to enforce standards of identity. And so Big Almond should not be able to call it almond milk. And Big Oat should not be able to call it oat milk. And my dairy farmers get really, really agitated when they go into the grocery store and see the dairy case and all these things called milk or dairy names that mean something, plant-based. And so, but I have had some real arguments with folks who think that that's almost a frivolous fight that I've picked. And it's not to my dairy farmers, but you know, we sort of talk it through. And it's not like I'm banning almond beverage, but call it beverage or juice or something else that doesn't have a statutory or regulatory meaning. So yeah. So, but I think just being open to dialogue, hearing why somebody's in disagreement, and then being clear of the value-based positions that you take, where you're not going to change your mind.
I know how to milk a cow, but an almond? Like, how does
Oh,
one
there's
milk
a
an
great
almond?
there's a great video about that. Hysterical.
Hi, you had a question.
Yes. First of all, thank you for coming today. Really
Pleasure.
pleasure speaking, and was very happy to see you reelected.
Thank you.
So, Latinos are the fastest growing demographic in Wisconsin. You talked about the dairy industry. I think that there was a Center for Workers study from UW-Madison that showed that about 60% of labor in the dairy industry in Wisconsin is performed by undocumented people. President-elect has promised a regime of mass deportation. What would you do, or what are you going to do to protect undocumented people in Wisconsin?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you already, my office has gotten so many calls from people who are really, really frightened. One of the things that you do in a Senate office or a House office or any office of elected officials, you have what we call casework, where we're trying to help people navigate a system. And while we don't give legal advice, we can explain, the various options that are available to folks. And I can tell you, people are calling, and people are very frightened about what might happen. There's a few things that have been threatened that I think we need to do everything we can to make sure that the law is followed. And so the idea of having the military used to round people up is just not acceptable or legal in the United States of America. And we're trying to think through, are there things we can do while we're still in the majority before the next Congress that would provide greater assurance that that will not happen here. I think that we need to also be very careful with regard to the nominations that are being made for departments that should follow the rule of law, or should uphold the rule of law, and make sure that every I is dotted and every T is crossed as the new administration comes in. That's going to be a challenge because, as we talked about some of the nominees, the president-elect is picking folks to try to push that as far as he can. And it'll be our job to scrutinize them as carefully as possible.
Dr. Paul Millett of the Les Ask.
Good question. I was curious on the campaign trail what you were hearing on the issue of immigration from dairy farmers, the dairy industry, and farming in general, given that Trump certainly has this very strict, even stricter than the first term, plans on immigration and deportation, but those industries in Wisconsin rely so heavily on seasonal workers as well as full-time immigrant labor.
Yeah, and I will say in dairy in particular, most of the agricultural visas are for planting or harvesting season, but cows have to be milked every single day. And so the seasonal visas doesn't work in the dairy industry very well. I can share what I heard on the campaign trail, but I much prefer to tell you what I hear from people as a senator. So, farm groups come in usually more than once a year, fly-ins to DC, sit down, meet with me and my staff, and talk about their challenges and the policy interests, talk about what they want to see in the Farm Bill, talk about their workforce. So does the chambers of commerce and manufacturing entities talk about their workforce needs, and almost everybody needs more skilled workers, whether it's a dairy farm or a factory in Wisconsin. It's sort of our economy. So I hear about the need for immigration reform all the time. It's interesting that when I first was elected to the Senate, oftentimes there was sort of a whisper at the end of a meeting, and by the way, if you can get the immigration system fixed, we really rely on these hard workers and we really want to keep them, et cetera. And I'm like, a little bit louder, and are you saying that also to my Republican counterparts as you visit them in their office, or are you only just thinking that I'm an ally? And so, and I have heard them become much more vocal about it. But I also have seen, and especially in this election cycle, the conversation move from, can you guys get the job done with comprehensive immigration reform, to just the focus on the southern border. And it seemed like, because of the campaign, almost because this became an issue, that there was very little additional discussion about how can we tackle the whole issue, and instead just make people terrified about what's happening at the southern border. And so that's how the campaign sort of affected the larger conversation.
Back to this side of the room, Stephanie.
Here today.
It's a pleasure.
So in addition to labor, we also know that energy is also a huge factor to power our farms back in Wisconsin, and we just love your thoughts on, given the incoming administration's sort of their perspective on where energy policy should go from here, and then also knowing the incredible investments made in those hydrogen hubs, I believe through the Inflation Reduction Act, what the status might be for them
Yes.
going forward. But overall, we'd just love your thoughts on what you ideally would love the administration to focus on as it relates to energy policy over the next 4 years.
Yes. Well, certainly there were threats during the course of the election to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act, which has a huge number of provisions relating to promoting energy production, especially with clean renewables, so solar and wind in particular. And the investments are such that it became the largest, the biggest measure ever passed to reduce carbon emissions. The estimate is, if fully implemented, we would reduce carbon emissions by 40% by the year 2030. In its initial years of implementation, I am hearing from a lot of folks who are big players in the energy sector, who maybe were skeptical when we were looking at passing it, and are now totally bought in and are making huge investments. And in fact, the tax incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act have leveraged many times more private sector investment. And so with the threats to overturn or to get rid of it, I just feel like there are enough folks that Republicans listen to who are totally invested in keeping it, that it'll be a very difficult thing to do. The other major part of the Inflation Reduction Act had to do with health care and having Medicare negotiate lower prices. And I know I'm going off the energy question, but I just also, if that's what they're after and they want to repeal, that actually saves people money, saves Medicare money, extends the solvency of Medicare, and saves tax dollars. So getting rid of it is not going to be easy for Republicans, even if they threaten to do so during the course of their campaign. But in terms of moving forward, and especially when you're talking about both agricultural issues and energy issues, I see a lot of opportunity for bipartisan work on deploying some of this in rural areas, agricultural lands, and making that, so I have a bill with Chuck Grassley about what we call agrivoltaics. So making it harmonious to install solar in rural areas, but also be able to keep the land in production or keep it as grazing land, or there's all sorts of, I think, opportunities to reach across the aisle and strengthen our diversity of our energy portfolio in America. I do think Trump has promised the big oil and gas companies quite a bit, and they've promised him quite a bit. But again, at least in a more local level, many of those companies are diversifying and are taking great use of the tax incentives that allow them to to diversify their portfolio of energy.
Time for one or two more questions. I saw that hand, and then we'll.
Also heard the rumors that Boone said he wanted multiple reconciliation bills next year. Do we think that's actually feasible? I mean, I'm thinking back to 2017 when they spent a large portion of the year debating the Affordable Care Act before actually settling down on their tax cuts. Do you see like a strong grip in the Republican Party to kind of corral everyone into two reconciliation bills?
And I have to remember the rules on, you can only do one reconciliation per budget.
So they could do two because the CR would push it.
Right, okay. So I think they'll use one for their tax measure. And yeah, I'm not sure that I see, I'm not sure that I see them using two. I'd have to think more about, like, so I remember the last time we used it and trying to, obviously the parliamentarian decides whether something can be attached to budget reconciliation. We tried to do immigration, and the ruling was no. Even though it has a huge fiscal impact, a positive fiscal impact to do comprehensive immigration reform, nope, the parliamentarian ruled not. Now, would they consider, something that's always been considered off limits, but like firing the parliamentarian in order to get somebody ruling that, I don't know. But I would hope that they wouldn't go, that's just too far. We abided by the parliamentarians' rulings. And so I think the question would be, obviously you can accomplish a lot through budget reconciliation because it just requires a simple majority vote. But I'm not sure a lot of their policy ideas that they're after would fit into a budget reconciliation model. I'll think more about that. I hadn't gotten that question yet, so.
It was just leaked this morning.
Oh, was it? I missed it.
Literally like an hour before here, it said that Thune was, from unnamed sources, that it was going to be the first one of the first 30 days was on defense, energy, and I think immigration, and they wanted to do one later in the year for the tax cuts.
Well, immigration can't be on reconciliation, so okay. I'm glad I talked my way through that, but that'll be interesting. I'm gonna study that a little bit more.
Lesson for the students here. You can always talk it through.
Obviously, going into the next administration,
Yeah. I know from somebody, I'm the lead author of the Women's Health Protection Act, which is the bill that would have codified Roe nationally so that we don't have a patchwork quilt of states with different policies and so I had in my mind sort of what were the next steps I was going to take if we won everything in the election. And now I think the question is, again, we're playing defense now on this. It will involve discussions with the members of the Republican Party who are pro-choice about what that, can we work together on defense against something bad happening? I feel pretty certain we can prevent a national ban from being enacted into law. It's interesting with regard to the Supreme Court that they have, while they did hand down the Dobbs decision, they have punted on 2 subsequent cases that deal with aspects of the issue, whether it's the EMTALA, the emergency room case in Idaho, or the mifepristone case. So, yeah, I think maybe continuing our drumbeat to protect other things that are, the court in Dobbs told us where they might go next. So protecting contraception, protecting in vitro fertilization access, and hoping that, and looking very carefully at the judges that are nominated by President Trump in his next term.
So, Senator, as you can see, we have a lot of students here, Marquette University, University of Wisconsin, your alma mater. We all know, I see the cheers, I love that. Public service is hard. Public service is really hard, whether you're running for office or an elected official or going into nursing, teaching, police officer. Public service these days can be really hard. Do you have a message as these students are sort of wrapping up their internships today, this week, for students about entering public service?
Well, first, it's really rewarding. I will tell you, I was very young when I first sort of got that. I was on my student council in middle school. And I was really active, and I did a lot of projects that helped serve the school and the community around the school, and remembering how grateful people were that, that somebody cared and somebody asked questions and somebody tried to respond to challenges they had. And the idea that, wow, I could do that and make a living at it. It was, I mean, when I was on the county board, I wasn't making a living on it, but that I could do that was so it's really, really rewarding. I think also as public service has become more politicized, that's the challenge, but there's things that we can do individually as well as collectively to try to depoliticize that. I want to just reflect that immediately before coming here, I was on the floor of the Senate listening to Mitt Romney give his farewell speech. It's a tradition that people give farewell speeches, and that other senators, oftentimes you're speaking to an empty room, but that other senators come to hear. And a big theme of his and the tributes that followed were focusing on the division that we have right now and how to heal it. And when somebody like him leaves, somebody who has made that a mission, you worry that it's going to get worse, not better. But we can all do things to heal that, just like the first question about people with whom you differ. Just engaging with them sometimes diminishes the differences that you're that you're experiencing. And so in the idea of public service, when we have fewer divisions, I think that public service will be even more rewarding. And so we have to have both as our mission. You know, I think about nurses and, you know, police officers. Pre-pandemic, nurses were just revered, right? Doctors and nurses. And then they were vilified. And we've got to figure out a way to reverse that. You know, teaching, same thing. It's become politicized. And, you know, talking about policing the curriculum and banning books and those sort of things. Yeah, we've got to, public service is rewarding, it is doing good, and we just have to work to depoliticize all of these professions.
On that note, I want to thank all of you for being here. Congratulations to the interns here who are wrapping up their semester. That's amazing. And please wish all of you a happy holidays, but please join me in thanking Senator Baldwin for being here today.
Thank you.